Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave Lucas, and you're watching a very special All Points. H.D. Graham and his books. He's written 7 of them, and he is a Master Sergeant for the Air Force. Almost called you Army. That got me beat up. And he has done a great job in Special Ops, and so we're very glad to be here. Now, we did an introduction video, and then we did a video over his first book. In this video, we're going to go over some things that he didn't get to cover in that first book, and we'll introduce his second book, and we'll just keep going till we get all these in. As you can see behind me, he has written several books, 7 in all. And we maybe have a special announcement at the end of this. He'll write another one. We have no idea. But HD, it's so good to have you on the program. Thank you so very much for taking the time. We're in your home so that the folks know where we are as we do these. And these are your books, a bountiful number of books that you have written, 7 in all. And we talked a lot about your first book, and we want to pick back up on that. And also we're going to be talking about his second book, that is entitled A Salute to the Nurses That Served in Vietnam. And this, I think, is a very heartfelt book that you did.
Yes.
Because you ended up having been served by nurses while you were over there, and you were in the hospital, and they took good care of you.
Yes, they took very good care of me and all the other troops.
Right, exactly. They certainly were, they've been sort of overlooked, too, I think, that in Vietnam and other places, these nurses and the ministry that they performed for everyone?
It seems like during the Vietnam War, especially, the medical services as a whole was overlooked. They weren't combat, and they were overlooked by the generals. They were overlooked by the Pentagon, the administrations, and they deserved a lot more credit than they ever received, because if it hadn't been for them, we would have had hundreds of thousands of more casualties than we actually had.
Yeah, they ended up being right there on the front lines with the soldiers, right?
Yes, they were in medevac choppers. Would go out and pick up wounded troopers, take them back to the field of hospitals. Oftentimes, if they couldn't move the troopers for some various reasons, they would stay with the units and with the wounded people.
Oh, that's incredible. Well, just to give a brief history here, if somebody's watching this for the first time, you should go back and look at the other videos we have. We have the introduction video, H.D. Graham and his narrative, his story, a tremendous man who served your country, the United States of America, in special ops, special operations, out of the Air Force, which, as I had told him before, until I met H.D. and we started talking about this video project, I'd never really thought about special ops in Air Force, and I always thought about special ops in the Army or Marines, but this has been very enlightening for me, and I really appreciate it.
Yes, the Air Force surprised me when I learned in 1962 that they had a Special Operations Division. I had no idea they had, and the general told me, young man, you weren't supposed to know.
Weren't supposed to know. Well, we really appreciate it, and so let's dip back and talk a little bit about your other book. We have that here. It is the Mother, Please Let Me Go book, an Air Force Career to Remember, H.D. Graham. And I was the one who led you down the primrose path. The cover depicts him on the floor and tied up, and he told that story in the last video. You'll have to get that. But you wanted to go back up and pick up a couple of things that we overlooked. It was because of me. I led you on down through the path. So let's stop and make sure we take care of that next.
Okay, yes, I want to go back and cover some incidents that I'm sure everyone we really appreciate to hear.
Yeah. What's the first one that you want to talk about?
Okay, the first one, now I had to make some smart cards because
That's
I can't
fine.
remember very well anymore, but the first one was after I finished Vietnamese language school, I actually went to Fort Bragg with the Special Forces on their C-123, and I spent, I think, was 10 or 12 days with them. And I observed their various training techniques, which is extremely useful to me and also unusual at the time to me. And the first thing I got to observe was their hand-to-hand combat training. And I'll tell you, their trainers, actually, I thought were trying to kill the troops they were trying to train. And I thought, wait a minute, they're supposed to be training these troops, not trying to kill them. But they were very rough on them, but they all responded favorably to it.
So when you see those movies where those guys are really manhandling them and throw them to the ground and all that, it's pretty much like that.
It is a fact.
Well, and you said that they responded well. They didn't gripe or quarrel or complain. Those trainees.
Well, they were so happy to be selected for Special Forces. I think they would endure just about anything to succeed.
I see. So they wanted to be a part, and so they were willing to pay the price.
They were extremely motivated.
Now, I heard the operative word there, though. You observed.
Yes, I observed.
They didn't wing you around.
Well, we'll get to that in these notes, but
Okay.
it wasn't my intention to get involved except just to observe.
Because the Air Force was still putting theirs together, or they just sent you there to observe, or why is it that it occurred like that?
Well, actually, the Vietnamese language schools, now this was the first short version of the Vietnamese language course that was conducted just for the advisors in Vietnam.
Oh, I see.
Now, they had a year-long language course in Monterey, California that taught really the southern dialect of the Vietnamese.
And in depth.
Right, very in-depth. And you could deal with civilians or high-ranking military personnel with that training. With the training I received, you could deal with the Montagnards and the field troops.
I see. I see. So it was enough to get you there and enough to give information or to get some vital information, but to carry on a conversation about ingredients in a recipe, maybe not.
Not with the people in Saigon or the southern part of the country.
Right.
They all had different dialects. As a matter of fact, we were told there were like 20 to 24 different dialects throughout the country.
Wow, wow.
That's why they had such a hard time communicating and getting along with each other.
Oh, I see. I see that. It causes frustration when you can't understand someone.
And a lot of friction.
And a lot of friction. It can lead to conflict, open
Yes,
conflict.
it can.
Yep. As we saw in Vietnam. All right, so you were in the language school and they sent you to observe.
Yes, at Fort Bragg with the Special Forces. But the reason for that primarily was I was not scheduled to be an observer at Fort Bragg. I was scheduled to hop a plane and go back to Nha Air Base, Okinawa, and wait for further orders. But the Vietnamese language school was curtailed about 8 or 9 days because I believe the instructors run out of stuff to talk about and discuss and teach. Because it was the first course, and every time you have your first session of your first course, it is always messed up.
A disorganized mess.
Very disorganized.
You'd think
They
they'd have their
didn't
act
have some
together.
list of people to set it up right. Some officers took care of it, and it's always messed up.
Always mess. So what else do you have for us here?
Okay, I told you I went to Fort Bragg with the Special Forces, and I think all the time it was a setup. But they thought that since I had some time left and I was just going to be sitting around being a gopher for the Air Force personnel at the language school, that they would just take me to Fort Bragg because the colonel, the Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel, said that he thought I was going to end up being an advisor in Vietnam, and I thought he was way out in left field on that. But I wanted to appease the Lieutenant Colonel, so I went to Fort Bragg. Didn't have anything else to do anyway, and didn't want to sit around just twiddling my thumbs. And I thought I would really enjoy it, and in many, many ways I did enjoy my time at Fort Bragg, but in some cases it was sort of painful.
How was it painful?
Well, when I first got to Fort Bragg, they decided, they invited me to participate in hand-to-hand combat, and I decided not to do that because I could just see myself laying dead on the field and everybody observing the body. So I decided I wouldn't do that. And then they decided they were going to jump off their jump tower, which was about 200 feet above the ground. And I was going to stand on the ground and just observe the jumps. Well, after a while, I got real brave, and they finally talked me to going up on the jump tower.
So they were sort of pushing you, but you finally just concurred. They couldn't make you do it, but you decided to do it.
Well, yes, but on the jump tower, they instructed me it felt to me like several days, but it was only 2 or 3 hours on jump techniques. Well, I didn't know why they were doing that because I really wasn't interested in it. But then the jump master tried to get me to jump several times, and of course, each time, being the logical-minded individual I was, I decided not to jump. Well, somehow, he turned around, and that particular day, well, every day, actually on the jump tower, you had to wear a parachute because the wind conditions were tremendous at that height. And so that was actually for safety purposes. But anyway, the jump master had urged me several times to jump, and I always happily declined. And somehow he turned around and knocked me off the tower.
Somehow you just happened to get knocked off the
Right.
tower by the jump master.
Right.
After he'd been talking to you time after time after time, just by accident, you went off the jump trailer.
And when he first knocked me off, it just about scared me to death. And the chute opened with a jerk, and I floated down and didn't even fall down when I landed.
So you landed straight up on your feet.
I sure did. But I did not go back up on the jump tower again.
That was it, huh?
That was it.
Well, now, did you pull the cord, or did they have a cord that would pull it as you?
No, they had the jump, or the parachute was attached to a static line, and
I
after
see.
it got so long, it would pull the chute
Pull
out.
the shirt right out.
Right.
Is 200 feet tall enough to?
Well, it was in that case because apparently it was a short static line and it pulled the chute off just about as soon as you jumped.
Oh, I see.
Pulled it right out and you floated down.
And
And I
you-
was a lightweight anyway, so there wasn't a lot of weight on the chute.
Right, exactly.
And then the second incident, they decided I should accompany a team on a night field exercise out in the western part of North Carolina in the pines. The pine trees, beautiful country. But I thought that would really be interesting and exciting, and I was a country boy anyway, so I was right at home in that decision. So before I left Fort Bragg, they kept telling me that I should take a lot of snack items with me because we might not get any meals or any food while we were had an overnight stay in the Piney Woods. So as a result of those conversations with various Special Forces men, I was absolutely loaded down with snack items. I had snack items in my shirt and in my pockets, and I think some jerky in the edge of my boots and so forth. Well, anyway, when they settled down to spend the night in the forest, what I saw was really odd was the A team. There's an A team is a 12-man team, and they formed a sort of a clock. And when they actually bedded down, their feet was pointed in toward the center of the clock, and their arms and shoulders and heads were outside. And I found out the reason for that position was that when everyone's breathing or snoring with their heads so close, no one can hear anything. But when they have their heads out, the communication and the sounds are much more clear.
Ah,
So that was a good educational point, because I had no idea why they were kicking each other with their feet. Well, anyway, since I made the 13th man and the clock's only got 12 hours on it, I was outside the circle and I was put my ground sheet on the bed, and I was going to go ahead and fix my bed and lay down, but I decided I would share some of those various snack items with my Special Forces buddies. Well, about the time I just started over to the area they were getting ready for bed in, which was probably about 30 feet away, 3 of those ornery troopers came over to me, and 2 of them grabbed me, one of them by the arms and the other one by my ankles, and lifted me off the ground, and the third one searched me and took all my snack items and then turned me over and took all the snack items out of my back pocket and down my neck and so forth that I had. And then they went back to their circle of where their other buddies were, and they shared the snacks with them.
and you ended up with nothing.
Well, I had a packaged jerky and a few cookies I had laid down on my ground sheet before they got to me.
Oh my gosh.
And I could hear them laughing and carrying on and wondered why I hadn't responded to what they did and everything. And then when we got back to Fort Bragg, the colonel apologized. It wasn't a very serious apology, but he apologized and acted like he didn't know anything about it. And I told him I didn't think he should worry about it or be upset about it, because I wasn't upset about it, because I was going to share the snacks with the Special Forces troopers anyway.
So that's really what you were going to do, was share them around, and they took them, but you still had a few.
I still had a few, but I think they thought it was a great surprise, and it was a surprise the 3 of them would grab me like they did and search me. But I was going to share them with them anyway, so it didn't really make a lot of
So it
difference.
didn't mentally, you were okay with it.
It was fine, and they didn't hurt me or anything.
That's a good thing.
some of the guys said, well, weren't they a bit rough with you? I said, well, I expected them to be a bit rough with me. After all, you don't grab someone by the arms and legs and flip them around 2 or 3 times without a little bit of pain someplace.
That's right. It seems like that you try to keep an even keel throughout your service to the country and the Air Force Special Ops. Seems like you kept a level head all the way through.
Well, I tried to, especially with the Special Forces, because that would have been one item if they had noticed anything other than being happy with everything you're doing. They would have harassed you forever.
So they would have found out your weak point and they would have hammered you with it.
Absolutely, and I was not going to show them any of the many weak points I knew I had.
Yeah, that's right. Not going to show them any weakness. Well, what else do you want to mention before we...
Well, I want to mention the first combat experience I had, and that took place on 21 March 1963. But before I really get into that, I want to tell you, when I arrived in Saigon at Tan Son Nhut Air Base on 29 October 1962, I was met at the plane. It was a C-130 from Naha Air Base, Okinawa, and 2 senior NCOs met me, introduced themselves, and welcomed me to Vietnam, and took me to the transit quarters for the night. And on the way out, they told me they would pick me up at 7:30 the next morning, which in military time is 07:30, and they would take me to breakfast, and then I had a briefing at MAG headquarters, which I knew absolutely nothing about.
Mm.
And so we had breakfast, and then we went to MAG headquarters for a briefing. And the first, I met some of the individuals in the outer area, and then I was taken into the briefing room, and I met a 1-star general, brigadier general, and a full Air Force colonel, and they were going to give me my briefing before I headed up country. And I did ask a few questions and got some answers, not a lot. The first thing the general told me I was going to be in Air Force Special Operations. An Air Force Special Operations Command operated out of the Pentagon. And I said, sir, I didn't know the Air Force even had a Special Operations unit. And he put his finger in my chest and said, young man, you weren't supposed to know. It's highly classified. And then the colonel was telling me that there were several people considered for the position, and I was the one that was selected. And I wanted to know, well, why, out of all the numerous people that apparently was considered, that I was the one selected. And he said, well, he said, your background. And I didn't understand that comment because I really didn't have any background except living on a farm, being brought up on a farm in Ohio. And he went on to tell me that they had observed when I was in basic training and technical school training that I had got along really well with the Vietnamese and the Cambodians and the Laotians. And I had been to they were going to send me to the Vietnamese language school, and I had expressed interest many times in going to Southeast Asia to be stationed with some of those individuals. And I don't know whether that was all made up or where it was actual factual. I'm sure since it came from a general and a colonel, had to be factual. Well, anyway, so that's how I ended up in, according to the Air Force, that's how I ended up in Air Force Special Operations. And they also told me that the Special Forces would be very, very hard on me, training me at Quy Nhon. They actually didn't use the word Quy Nhon, the city location. They actually said APO 38, and I said, where is APO 38 located? Well, young man, we can't tell you that because that's a classified location, and when you get there, you ask them in there, and they'll tell you. So I had no idea where it was going.
You had no idea where you were going and really didn't have any idea what you were getting into.
No, and I said, what's my job going to be? Well, the colonel said, you haven't been told anything about this, have you? I said, no, sir, not a thing. And he said, well, you're going to be an advisor. I said, sir, who in the world am I going to advise? I have no experience in anything to advise anything, but you will have. He says, and I said, how's this? He said, well, when you get to your location, where your duty station is going to be, you're going to be trained in weapons and tactics, and you're going to be trained in hand-to-hand combat and any other training that your trainers want to give you. And I said, sir, who am I going to be working with? He said, well, you're going to be working with the United States Army Special Forces troops, Det 6, 1st Special Forces Group from Okinawa. And I said, still, I don't know who I'm going to be training. He said, well, you're going to be training the Montagnards. Well, I'd never heard of the Montagnards before. Come to find out, the Montagnards were the original Vietnamese, and their main locations was from Nha Trang to Quy Nhon along the coast, and west into the Central Highlands to the Cambodian and Laotian border.
So this is really a culture a little bit more tribal than many of us realize. Is that right?
Yes, it was. And the Montagnards were very wonderful people. I was not trained in their language, but I had so much interest in them. It didn't take me long to pick up 300 or 400 words of their dialect. And unfortunately, not all the words were favorable words.
You picked up a few that were not so good, right?
I didn't particularly use them, but they were used very liberally by the Montagnards and Special Forces guys. But anyway, when I got to, I had to go to Da Nang before I went to APO 38. And I went to Da Nang for an intelligence briefing by an Army intelligence guy, because we didn't have Air Force intelligence personnel at Da Nang at the time. And also onward transportation to my final duty location, which was APO 38, supposedly the next morning.
Right. Right.
And during the night at Da Nang, now everything went pretty well at Da Nang. The personnel officer at Da Nang, which was Air Force, he wanted to keep me at Da Nang because he was short on troops, and I told him he would have to deal with the generals and the colonels on that, because this was assignment from headquarters Air Force, the Pentagon, and I did not think he as a captain should take the liberty of deciding to keep me in the train, because I thought he would probably be in a world of trouble.
Right, right.
So he was a little bit upset about that and said he didn't want to buck a general and a colonel, so he better just forget about that whole idea. And during the night, I was told also not to leave my building facility or my room, and it was Air Force Transit Quarters. And I asked why not. He said, well, just take my word for it. It's not safe. You're not armed or anything. You don't know the area, and do not leave your room. Well, so I didn't leave my room, but about 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard a couple of shots fired, but I'd never heard what the commotion was about, and it was never mentioned or anything.
To you.
And I thought it might be something classified, so I better not mention it either.
All of this is available in HD's book entitled Mother, Please Let Me Go. And this initially gives or sketches for you his training and all those things that he's been talking about so far. And we were wanting to take our time with this to give HD plenty of time to tell his story, that are located in 7 of his books that you can get, and you can write, go to Amazon and get it there, or you can write HD. And before we end this segment of the video project, well, he'll give us that information. So you want to be not only share this and hit that like button, but also you'll be wanting to try to pick up, I'm sure, some of his books, because this veteran, he deserves your attention and time and honor for all the work that he.
You can get all the books from Ex Libris Publishing Company, which they're online, and you can also get them from Amazon, and you can get them directly from me, and I will personalize every book you get from me. Now, if you get the books directly from me, you should contact me at 36008 State Route 143, Pomeroy, Pomeroi, Ohio 45769. Phone number 740-742-3033, and I will sell you a hardback for $20 plus $6 handling and shipping, or a softback of any of the books for $15 plus $6 shipping and handling. Now, if you get the book from Amazon or from Ex Libris, they are also going to charge you postage and handling. Besides the price of the book from both agencies is $29.99 for the hardback, $19.99 for the softback, plus they're going to charge you $19.99 or $95, I guess it is, shipping and handling. Now, it's amazing to me that I can ship books, put them in boxes, and ship them and everything for right at $6 a book, but yet they have to have $19.99 or $19.95.
Well, I guess there's
Just
a
amazing.
bunch of people involved. Get your copy of H.D. Graham's book. You can write him right here. He'll sign every one of them for you, and you can buy family, or if you've got a veteran in your family, you'll want to get this book. You've been watching All Points Special Edition, and we've been talking to H.D. Graham, especially about his book called Mother, Please Let Me Go. And we've only touched on the detail that's involved in here. We know that it's interesting, and particularly it's very special for you to get it. So we appreciate you watching. Please continue to watch our series as we continue to talk to H.D. Graham about his story and his life as special operations and his very, very colorful life all throughout. I'm Dave Lucas, your host, and we'll be contacting you again. We'll be bringing this to you again. Please keep watching, like and subscribe, and make sure that you tune back in for our next segment, H.D. Graham.